Immediately after his baptism, the Spirit sent Jesus out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with wild beasts, and angels attended him. Immediately after his baptism, Jesus is sent into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. I always warned people who came to me for baptism to watch out, particularly in the week before and after their baptism, and not be surprised if they have a particularly hard time. That's because Satan always tries to discourage people who are moving towards God. And Satan doesn't come in the form of a little devil with horns and a forked tail. He comes more often in a series of unusually bad arguments with your wife or something like that. Don't be surprised. It's Satan trying to discourage you. There's nothing wrong. Just defeat him by apologizing to your wife and carrying on. Satan tries to discourage anyone moving towards God. But notice that it's the Spirit who leads Jesus into the wilderness, who sends him into the wilderness. Now, Jesus has just been baptized in the Holy Spirit. Now, baptism in the Spirit is often associated with a kind of honeymoon time with God, and I think to some extent it's meant to do that. I would love to have honeymoon times with God. I'd like to have all honeymoon time with God, but that's not how it is. I'd love God to send me to Switzerland, but he can, if he chooses, send me to the wilderness. We often sing, He is Lord, He is Lord, and we must let him be Lord. He can send me where he wants, and it's my business to follow. Sometimes he sends me to the wilderness. There was a famous golfer in the 1920s called Bobby Jones. He won his first golf tournament at the age of 6, and he was the first ever to complete the calendar Grand Slam. But he developed a rare disease in his back that left him with constant excruciating pain. Someone asked him how he felt about that, and he gave this answer that has become famous. Life is like golf. Bad breaks come from good shots, good breaks come from bad shots. You have to play it where it lies. And that is what the Spirit and what life can do to us. Sometimes we get bad breaks from good shots, and we have to play it where it lies. Then notice the phrase near the end of the passage, wild beasts and angels. I would like, if I may, to use that phrase a little bit figuratively for a few minutes. We all have things that are good for us and things that are bad for us, wild beasts and angels. Some of them are things we do, some of them are people we interact with. Quite a lot of them are wild beasts within us, attitudes, ways of thinking, patterns of thought that really are bad for us. The trouble is that sometimes they're not easy to discern which is the good and which is the bad. For example, anger and depression are often thought of as bad angels, but they aren't necessarily. Even things like jealousy and bad dreams, they can be good angels urging us to change something in our life which actually is not doing us good. St. Ignatius of Loyola created a spiritual discipline specifically for discerning between wild beasts and angels. He called them good angels and bad angels, and he called it the discerning of the spirits. He noticed that in life, sometimes he would be engaged in activity or interaction with someone else or in a pattern of thought, and at the time it felt okay. But he observed that afterwards it left an after feel that had somehow diminished his faith, hope, and love. He always used those three as the test. And that after feel of diminishing his faith, hope, and love, he called desolation. He also noticed that sometimes he was engaged in an activity or with somebody else or in patterns of thought, and noticed that afterwards his faith, hope, and love had been increased. He called that an emotion of consolation. And from that he developed a spiritual discipline. He called it the examination of consciousness. What he encouraged was this: that last thing at night, before you go to bed, instead of looking at your cell phone and going to bed with cell phone thoughts in your mind, just briefly go through the day and examine your day and see if you can discern in your day some period of desolation where you felt something decreased your faith, hope, and love. Confess that and determine to move away from it. And then see if you can discern in your day a period of consolation, something that increased your faith, hope, and love. Give thanks for it and determine to move more towards it. And with those thoughts in your mind, go to sleep. This is very akin to what Jesus said in John 10, verse 10. The thief breaks in to kill and steal and destroy, but I have come that you may have life in all its fullness. There are those things that come to take away life, and there are those things that come to give life. And we need to discern them and move away from one and towards the other. Some years ago, I spent a few days in a retreat center, and there was an old nun there, and she was very debilitated. I think she had multiple sclerosis. But I noticed that through all her suffering, there was kind of a purity and a joyfulness even in her spirit. And so when I got a chance, I had a chat to her, and I asked her, how did she manage that? And she looked me in the eye and said, Andrew, I avoid self-pity like the plague it is. She had learned to recognize a bad angel and moved away from it. And I have no doubt that in her life she had also identified good angels and moved towards them.